Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Any Given Saturday podcast, where anything can absolutely happen on any given Saturday. And I think what we saw in a lot of the bowl games, we saw a lot of unexpected in these bowl games throughout the course of the bowl season. We also might have seen some slightly unexpected things in that college football playoff as well. That is the beautiful thing about the college sport. When you get a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds on a field, you never know what can happen. We had a real fun time watching those college football playoff games. So, got a jammed packed podcast for you guys here tonight. The last one, possibly in the 2023 actual season, before we get to that certain O word that I think only casuals know about. That being said, though, we do have quite a bit going on. We're going to obviously talk about those college football playoff games, previewing the national championship, and I will go ahead and give my national championship pick here tonight on this particular podcast. In addition to that, maybe we'll talk about the biggest bowl game in the New Year's Six that surprised me the most. And of course, we'll take a retroactive look at deciding objectively which conference had the very best bowl season. We ranked the conferences based on what they did on the field this year and neutral site favorability, which seemed like a hot hit for you guys. So we're going to do that again, except doing it through bowl season. So that's going to be coming later on in the show. And of course, it's a very hot thing to talk about this time of year. We're going to talk about the transfer portal. Going to talk about some notable blue chip players that have either entered the transfer portal or have committed in the transfer portal since the last time I actually got a podcast out to you guys. So, really excited about this whole ordeal. I hope you guys are excited about it as well, because I'm certainly am, and I hope you guys do enjoy. If you do, make sure you go ahead, smack that like button, hit that subscribe button as well if you have to be brand new, and let's try not to waste any more time from here on out. We got to talk about these college football playoff games. Man, we were just blessed to have the kind of semifinal games that we had over the course of the last weekend. And we saw this before last year, where we had very close semifinal games between Michigan and TCU. And then, of course, Ohio State falling to the eventual national champions in the Georgia Bulldogs. Well, we kind of had a similar feeling this year. Both of those games were decided at the very last possession. But let's go and jump into that first game that was decided on the field for the college football playoff. We got to talk about Michigan finding a way to take down Alabama 27 to 20. And is there a better view? Is there a better microcosm of what college football really should be about than the Rose Bowl? I mean, be honest. I don't think there was any greater feeling than what we saw from that Rose Bowl. Just a picturesque scene. Put the painting in the Louvre. It was an exciting game to watch. It was an exciting atmosphere, and Michigan found a way to come out on top. And honestly, not only did Michigan find a way to win, Michigan won this game, and they made more mistakes than what Alabama had on the other side. Sure, Alabama was certainly not perfect. They turned the ball over on a fumble. They also had some troubles snapping the ball at times. Jalen Milroe had some close calls there that almost ended up going the other way, ended up being Michigan football. But Michigan special teams, Michigan special teams was really trying to find a way to try to find a reason to lose this game, right? We had a muff punt that ended up being recovered by Alabama. And that was turned into, by the way, an Alabama touchdown. The only touchdown that Alabama scored in the first half. And then you had a second muff punt that nearly ended in a safety. And can you imagine, like, 1 yard difference? we were 1 yard away of possibly Alabama walking off on a safety of all things. That would have been quite the timeline that we would have certainly witnessed. But they were able to sustain themselves enough. They made the big plays in the right moment. And something that we do rarely see is not only Alabama losing, we saw Alabama lose before. No one is invincible. Like I said, these are 18 to 22-year-old kids. And of course, they're all human beings on that football field. So they're not going to be perfect either way. But Alabama got, how I say, dominated at the line of scrimmage. I'm going to say that again really slowly. Because I didn't fully believe it myself, but as I was watching the game, I couldn't help but think to myself, Michigan won the line of scrimmage here tonight, guys. Both sides of the ball. And save it some special team mishaps. Of course, they also, not to mention, they missed an extra point. They had a botched snap on that. They missed a shorter field goal. Alabama special teams look better. They had a kicker who was a runner-up for the Lou Garza, by the way, hit two 50-plus yard field goals. That is extremely difficult for any college kicker to do. Makes it look easy. Could have hit from 60, the way he was kicking it that night. So, if I were to tell you that the betting line came out for Michigan and Alabama was under a field goal, and Michigan had all of these miscues on special teams and overall lost the turnover battle. Maybe they didn't, but overall Alabama had the edge in terms of making less mistakes. You probably would have told me retroactively that Alabama probably won this game. And you wouldn't I wouldn't blame you if you fought off that way, because for the past decade plus, picking Alabama to win in big games and in big moments, it's the ultimate security blanket. But it is what it is. Michigan found a way to get it figured out, and they are moving on to the national championship game. Jalen Miller, however, he really struggled to find a groove in this game. And there's a reason for that. Michigan has the number one defense in college football. It was certainly going to be put up to the test because, there's not necessarily elite offenses this year in the Big Ten. Penn State was not there. Ohio State offensively took a step back. But this secondary, shout out to the Michigan secondary. They essentially erased the tied receivers, and Alabama's got some weapons over there. Don't get me wrong. There's not scrubs over there at the University of Alabama. But Michigan shut it down. The passing game was almost a non-factor. Jalen Milroe only went 16 for 23, 116 yards. There was only one singular pass play that went on the ground that went more than 13 yards. So, that being said, the passing game was not really working. Matter of fact, Michigan did dare Alabama to try to win on the ground. And even then, it did only come down to one singular play. That fourth down call where we saw Michigan take a timeout, Alabama took a timeout, and with the game on the line, they ended up going out and they tried a quarterback draw. Now, the quarterback draw actually was drawn up pretty well. Jalen Milroe just didn't make the correct cut. If he would have made his cut over to the left-hand side instead of running directly into the middle, he might have found his way into the touchdown. We would have had second overtime, and possibly we could have seen Alabama come out on top and prove some naysayers wrong, dare I say. But the execution wasn't completely there. Michigan got the stop. And Michigan, they faced some on-field adversity for the very first time. We saw Michigan have plenty of off the field problems. The first Harbaugh suspension, where we ended up seeing, they gave a recruit a cheeseburger. So Harbaugh suspended himself for 3 games for that. And then we had the Connor Stallions allegations, which, speaking of the Connor Stallion allegations, the NCAA is going to do its investigation. We might find that Michigan is going to be stripped of these wins. They're going to be stripped of this national championship. That might be vacated down the line. But until the NCAA does something, they're proven guilty by the NCAA, I'm going to treat this like any other football team that's in a national championship. Let the NCAA and whatever power that they have left, which is not much, let them handle that later on, and we'll keep it moving. But Michigan on the field really has not had to deal with the adversity that they've had to deal with in this particular Rose Bowl. I mean, Michigan was down before. Like, they've been down 7-0 against Indiana. And then Michigan would rattle off 50-plus unanswered points. They also had to hold up against a final drive against Ohio State, but the pressure was on Ohio State and not Michigan. And it showed at the very end where Michigan was able to pull it out last second on that final drive. But overall, in terms of the whole season, it was as smooth as it possibly could have gone. This was the first time that we've seen Michigan behind in the second half, and this team wasn't exactly battle-tested in trying to come back in a rally in the second half, at least this 2023 version. But when it had to, they executed well. They blocked well. They tackled well. And fourth quarter, Michigan was about as solid as you could find, with the exception of that muff punt towards the end of regulation. And it could serve them well against a Washington team that has played it much more than its fair share of one-score games. And of course, because Washington is undefeated, they have won them all. So Michigan is in the national championship, but now let's shift over to that other matchup that we had in the college football playoff, the Sugar Bowl out of New Orleans. I believe this is in the New Orleans Saints Stadium, if I'm not mistaken. Even though Washington was the higher seed, the Sugar Bowl favored Texas. Texas was favored in betting markets, and also Texas fans did not have to travel nearly as far as what Washington fans had to travel. And of course, that led to a crowd advantage in favor of Texas. So while it wasn't a true road game, this is about as much of a road game that you are going to get in a neutral site matchup, particularly in bowl season. Now, Texas, of course, did not play perfect. There's a reason why they lost 37-31. And I think a lot of those things was, I think Steve Sarkisian just might have scripted way too much. And then in that second half, it was just, actually, particularly in that fourth quarter, it was particularly a catch-up game. I mean, we're talking about Steve Sarkisian potentially scripting the first 40 plays of any given matchup. That's more than half of the plays in your typical games nowadays. That's a lot to script out. So you have this inability to kind of be flexible to early game situations, and it just felt that Quinn Ewers, he was not the most sharp either. He was only 24 for 43. Had his guys in a chance to win the game, but Quinn Ewers didn't have his best game either. The running game was fantastic. However, they only ran the ball 28 times, and often it seemed like it was just so that they can get Ewers going more than anything. I felt like they had an advantage if they leaned on their ground game, but that did not happen. The But that was not the biggest problem that I had with Texas towards the end. I think there was quite the miscalculation there towards the end of the game. So Donnie Mitchell, he catches a 1 yard touchdown with over 7 minutes to play in the game. This would pull Texas to within 7. They decide to kick the extra point, let them be down by 6 points. And normally I wouldn't really have an issue with this, but in that scenario, you're hoping to completely stop Washington, prevent them from getting any points in order to keep this as a one possession game. Um, Here's the thing, they were not stopping Washington at that point of the game. Washington was up 34-28. Washington, of course, has one of the best passing offenses in America, led by one of the best quarterbacks in America, Michael Penix Jr. So if you went for 2 and you succeeded, it would have been 34-29. And now you can at least be okay with them kicking a field goal. It would still have been a one possession game. And even if you miss, it would still have been a one possession game anyways, 34-27. So that happened. And even with that, I really did thought Texas was going to come back and win this game. Because Washington did actually catch a really bad break. Their star tailback, Dylan Johnson, he gets hurt. And the big significance of that is not just that Dylan Johnson is questionable for his national championship game. That's a massive loss if he can't go. But that being said, you also have the time stop for any injury. And Texas was very low on timeouts. So Dylan Johnson being hurt and not being able to get off the field, that saved 40 seconds. And in those 40 seconds, Texas was able to drive all the way into the red zone. It came down to the very last play of the game. And shout out to those DBs, by the way. That DB made a phenomenal play in order to preserve the win for Washington. But of course, the biggest thing for Washington that led to that victory, Michael Penix Jr. and Braylon Trice, those dudes are the truth, man. Michael Penix Jr. arguably played his best game in a Washington uniform. 29 for 38, 430 yards, 2 touchdown passes, and no interceptions. He also showed that mobility that he had back in Indiana. 3 rushes, 31 yards. And he kept his cool under the Texas pressure because, man, does Texas have some pass rushers. They can get to his quarterback. Penix was never bothered. And that's one thing that I admire about Penix when I've been watching college football all season long. Arguably, when it comes to pre-snap reads, I think he's the best quarterback in college football when it comes to recognizing what the defense is in and then making an adjustment at the line of scrimmage. He's also got some fantastic receivers. Roma Dunze, he's going to be a top 10 pick, I'm sure. Jalen Polk's a really strong football player, too. 11 combined catches, 247 yards. And, of course, defensively, Braylon Trice, you could argue he was the game's best player. And that was even what we said with Michael Penix Jr. Dude went off in this game. 2 sacks, 3 TFLs. He was in the backfield of Texas all game long. Reason why Quinn Ewers couldn't get going, Braylon Trice was never, ever able to allow this man to be remotely comfortable. But here's the thing. Washington played one of its best games of the season, and they might even need to play at a higher level because this Michigan team, there's been multiple times where we thought Michigan was going to fold, but they didn't. So that being said, congratulations to Washington. Texas got nothing to be ashamed about. Quinn Ewers probably is coming back. So you have a real chance, especially with an expanded playoff field, to possibly get Texas back in a position to win another national champion. I don't think Steve Sarkisian really needs to change too terribly much. He's right there. Just kind of what it is with Michigan. Just make small improvements within your personnel and your football team, and you should be A-okay. You should be good to go. And now, oh baby, we now have to talk about one of the, I guess, biggest elephants in the room. No pun intended for the Alabama Crimson Tide guys. We had a great college football playoff. But this college football playoff did have some controversy. We saw for the very first time a undefeated Power 5 conference champion left out of that top 4. Now, what we saw over the course of this weekend is that two things can certainly be true. Florida State got screwed. And I think there was certainly SEC bias in terms of Alabama getting that benefit of the doubt and getting that 4 spot over an undefeated conference champion. Now, that's not to say that Alabama was not capable of winning a national championship. They went wire to wire with the number 1 team in college football. And of course, Georgia, hypothetically speaking, according to our power rating model, after what happened in the bowl season games, Georgia would be favored over any team in the nation right now. That's Alabama included. But games aren't decided metaphorically. They're decided on football fields once and for all. And what Florida State did have a chance to do, even though they really did get screwed over. I think we can agree that they got screwed. They also could have proved those naysayers wrong. I mean, if Florida State would have won this Orange Bowl, they could have at least claimed a national championship, and I wouldn't blame them. This is much different from a 2017 UCF situation. This is a Florida State team that played a Power 5 schedule, and it still was not enough. It didn't matter. But then the Orange Bowl happened. And Florida State lost 63-3. And the only thing that I have is Florida State, really, guys? You let this happen to you? What are we doing? And listen, Florida State was missing the majority of its production. I hear ya. But at the same time, Georgia was not at full strength either. They had 15 players opt out through going into the transfer portal or opting out in preparation for the NFL draft. So while Georgia was not missing nearly the same amount of production, or they were not at full strength, they were not at full strength. Georgia was not at full strength. Florida State, however, also was not at full strength. But even with the team that they put on the field in the Orange Bowl, you would think that Florida State's team of backups and third string guys would be at least bare minimum comparable to teams like Ball State, UT Martin, UAB. Now, you're thinking to yourself, well, those are 3 random teams. Why are you mentioning those teams? Those are the teams that Georgia played in a non-conference matchups outside of SEC play. And all those 3 teams did not get blown out as much as Florida State did in this national championship. So, honestly, Florida State, I get it. You got screwed. But you also got to come out and show a little bit more pride than that. If you lost this game, that's fine. It's understandable if you don't win with a freshman third string quarterback. That's not a blue chip guy, by the way. Um, but even though Georgia was not at full strength, Georgia did whatever it wanted. They averaged 9 yards a play in this game. They pulled their starting quarterback, Carson Beck, after halftime. And even then, they still put up even more points in the second half. They put up 14 points on 2 third-quarter drives after that. And Florida State was never threatened. They weren't shut out. They were not shut out at all. So, unfortunately, it is what it is. It sucks if you're Florida State, but hopefully this Orange Bowl disappointment is not going to be something that is going to hold the program back long term. And I don't think it won't, but I did want to talk about this Orange Bowl because there was so much controversy about the Florida State decision. Few more things I want to talk about from this Orange Bowl, some key stats that happened, and then we'll dive into the actual national championship game. Carson Beck was fantastic, 13 and 18, 203, 2 scores. He did that all in the first half. Brock Glenn, on the other hand, 9 for 26, did throw for more yards than Jalen Milroe. So do what you want with that information. Did throw multiple interceptions, though. Georgia also dominated the time possession. Georgia held the ball for about almost 36 minutes, while Florida State only had 24 minutes. And then here's a big discrepancy. Georgia ran the ball for 372 yards. There are some teams out there that cannot get 372 yards in a total game, passing or running. Georgia did all of that on the ground. Florida State only had 63 yards rushing. They could not establish the run in this game either. You know why? Because they're not afraid of Brock Glenn. He was what he showed in the ACC championship and what he showed in this Orange Bowl is he is not ready to start at a Power 5 level yet. Not saying that Brock Glenn can never get there, but he's not ready just quite yet. He's not completely there. But yeah, that was a thing that happened. If you turn this off like at halftime, I don't blame you. Congratulations to Georgia, by the way, for showing up more prepared. Because Georgia's, even without winning national championship, Georgia's still on an excellent run. They've won 41 games in the last 3 years. They came in with the right mindset, and you saw from that final score, they are absolutely relentless in its execution. They will play from the opening whistle until the clock hits triple zeros. So congratulations to Georgia on winning the Orange Bowl. Florida State, hopefully you show a little bit better. And you did get DJU in the transfer portal. Hopefully you just give a little bit better injury luck here moving forward, so that you're not in a position to have these kind of controversies happen later on down the line. So that takes us now. It's enough talk about the national championship. Let's now take a look at what we got going on in this national championship game. Number 1, Michigan. Number 2, Washington are meeting for the national championship. Now, ironically, if we still had the BCS system, this would have been your national championship matchup. Just a thought. I personally prefer this college football playoff that we had. I think the 12-team playoff could be beneficial in the long term as well, expanding from 4 teams to 12. But Washington is going to be a really interesting case study, okay? So if you guys remember from back when we made our predictions in terms of who we thought was going to win the national championship all the way back in the preseason, back in early to mid-August, one of the things that we identified as a requirement to win a national championship is you have to meet a certain standard in terms of the blue chip ratio. That number is 50%. Every team, according to 247 Sports, that has gone on to win the national championship all the way back to 2015 when 247 Sports started to record this information have had at least 50% blue chip players, 4 or 5-star players on their roster. Washington, on the other hand, only has 27 total blue chip guys. That is less than a third of the roster being blue chip players. So Washington is going to be an interesting case study to see if they could break this mold or not. They're one game away from doing so. And one advantage that Washington will have over Michigan, they will have the quarterback advantage. It's not one of those, okay, we have a what is it? Like, I don't think it's a controversy to say that JJ McCarthy is not as good as Michael Penix Jr. I don't think there's anything wrong with that whatsoever. So they'll have at least one advantage in regards to trying to go out and pulling this off against Michigan. However, though, Michael Penix Jr., while he was brilliant, he may need to be brilliant once again because Michigan is bringing that pass defense. This is the number 2 pass defense in the country, number 1 in total defense. They are an absolute problem. They could very well be a problem. They might also need to create some plays outside of the pocket. I think this is a type of game where Michigan is going to have the advantage over in the line of scrimmage. I feel like this is an edge that Michigan is going to have in the line of scrimmage, and also with the loss of Dylan Johnson as well, that we could also see the possibility of being a little bit short-handed in this backfield as well. And you also wonder, with really the number of one possession games that Washington has played all season long, do they have one more of those in them? Those are legitimate questions and certainly legitimate concerns that are to be had, at least initially, right? Because man, they are going. They're gonna need Dylan Johnson, I think, to really have like a real chance. So we see what the line is. We know the lines have already came out on this. They've been out for a few days now since we saw the national championship solidify early Tuesday morning. It was a late night for those of you that watched the Texas and Washington game all the way through. So right now, the line is at -4.5 in favor of Michigan. The model is a little bit higher on Michigan than what the betting markets are. So Washington is going to need a brilliant performance on Michael Penix Jr. They are also going to need to win the turnover battle. This is not a type of game where you can make as many or more mistakes as Michigan and be expected to win the game. I don't think that necessarily happens here. I don't think that's necessarily the case. They got to win the turnover battle. Michael Penix Jr. has to be brilliant. And I think if you want to win this game, if you're Washington, I think what you got to do is that you got to have the ball last, plain and simple. Because Michigan showed in the Rose Bowl when it's late, 2 minutes left to go in the ball game, they need a score to force overtime. They can also get it done too. They found the ways to make that happen. So, all that considered, who do I think is going to win this national championship? Well, if you remember back from when I made my predictions and who I thought was going to win the national championship, I thought Michigan was going to go ahead. They're going to win it all. And while I'm rooting for Washington to win this game personally, I'm a Ohio State / Cincinnati sports fan. I don't think that Washington has enough as a team to pull off another win against Michigan. So we're going to go with Michigan to ultimately win this game. But I think that Michigan just has too much talent to be denied of a national championship 3 times in a row in the college football playoff. Because I think those DBs from Michigan, they are legit. Because while they haven't faced the passing attack like Washington, no DBs, they stopped the Alabama deep game. And they also did a very good job slowing down, not stopping, but slowing down that Ohio State receiving core that you could argue is the best receiving core in college football. And all Michigan has to do, literally, do not screw up like you did against Alabama, because Washington will take advantage. They have the offensive firepower to do that. But if we're filtering out turnovers, we're not expecting turnovers to happen necessarily. I think Michigan's going to win. We will go with Washington covering, though. It'll be closer than 4.5. I think it's going to go down to the last moments of the game, but I will go with Michigan. We picked Michigan to win national championship. We're sticking with it, but I'm excited about this national championship that is going to be happening on Monday night. I think it's going to be a real exciting one that I certainly cannot wait to watch whatsoever. So that should wrap up the talk that we have in terms of what we got going on with the college football playoff, kind of like the controversies behind it. But there's a couple more things that I definitely wanted to talk about before we end up signing off. So one of the things that we did before we ended up that ended up turning to be a real big hit. It's the most watched segment in the history of this channel. So what we did was, based on neutral site favorability as well as factoring in results that happened on the field, we ended up ranking all the conferences 1 through 10. So we ended up doing that yet again, but just specific to bowl season. Now, bowl season is technically not done yet, right? But even though bowl season is not technically done, every team in the bowl season has played at least one bowl game. So with one bowl game to go, this list is pretty firm. So how do we go about ranking these conferences? So we ended up doing a non-bias point system. We gave teams points based on how they did in their respective bowl game. So I kind of have it posted up on screen. Hopefully, future me editing this does remember that. So if you win by 25 or more, blowout, that's 4 points. 17 through 24, that's free. 9 through 16, 2. An 8-point win or less, that's 1. If you lose by 8 or less, you don't get any points. And then if you lose by more than that, you you lose points for your conference. I did also give teams a bonus if you ended up beating a ranked team in your bowl game. And you also get a bonus for your conference if you ended up winning a college football playoff game as well. So, all those rules aside, let's go ahead and jump into the not so final, but mostly final conference rankings that we do have for the 2023 bowl season. And everyone's records are very similar. Wasn't a conference that was overly egregious. There wasn't a conference that really dominated, but the way that these teams win their bowl games, that's what really separated these bowl teams at the end of the day. So, starting at the very bottom, got Conference USA. We have Conference USA in last. They had four of their 8 teams go to bowl season. And this was not a great bowl season for Conference USA, or at least this manufactured Conference USA. So they went 2-2, but their 2 wins, Jacksonville State, they barely beat Louisiana, who's going to have a losing record. Western Kentucky needed a miracle to beat Old Dominion. And then their 2 best teams that were represented in Conference USA Championship, New Mexico State and Liberty, well, they ended up being blown out. So Conference USA is at the very bottom. And then at 9, I got the ACC. The ACC, honestly, tremendously struggled in this bowl game. And what really hurt the ACC as a whole was, well, their best team in the conference, Florida State, they got demolished by Georgia. And yes, I know Florida State was not at full strength, but you got to play better than 63-3, man. That one physically hurt to watch. They weren't the only team to be blown out. North Carolina, they were blown out by West Virginia. Syracuse loses to South Florida. They get blanked 45-0. There were some bright moments too, like Duke beating Troy, Georgia Tech beating UCF. NC State was competitive with Kansas State. Boston College, shout out to the Eagles. They pulled the upset off against SMU. That's probably the best performance in the ACC, but just a tough year for the ACC conference as a whole. So they're at 9 for me. At 8 is the MAC. The MAC, solid year. Mine was competitive against Appalachian State. What hurt the MAC tremendously was, while they had one blowout, they had Eastern Michigan lose to South Alabama, not only get blown out, but then one of their players caused a fight after the game, and they didn't even win the brawl after the game either. Just bad day for Eastern Michigan for that bowl game. And while Ohio got a blowout against Georgia Southern, no one else really won convincingly. The bowl games that they did win, they were very close wins. You have Northern Illinois winning by a couple, but then you have like Toledo, Bowling Green, and Miami. They all also lost. So they end up going 2-4. But for the most part, with the exception of Eastern Michigan against South Alabama, they were competitive. But I do have them at 8 for that. Takes us up to number 7. Number 7, we do have the Mountain West. Now, the Mountain West started off relatively strong, actually. Fresno State, of course, blowing out New Mexico State. Air Force getting a big win against James Madison, who would have been ranked in this top 25 if they were actually allowed to compete in the college football playoff this year, if that was actually a thing, but they were on probation. That's a whole separate conversation. They did have some multiple losses, though. They did have Georgia State beat Utah State. San Jose State was upset by Coastal Carolina. And then UNLV gave it the old college try, but they did end up being pulled away from late. Kansas won by 13 there. So we got a couple of points there. So that's how they finished in 7th. 5th and 6th is going to be a little bit of a surprise, though. I have the American and the Big Ten tied for 5th place. Now, the Big Ten had also an average bowl record. And one thing about the Big Ten is that they could possibly jump up to second if they can get a blowout. If Michigan can get a blowout against Washington, they can move up to second as a conference. If they beat Washington by at least 17 points, they could move up to, I want to say, third. Not totally sure on that, on the numbers on that. But the Big Three of the Big Ten struggled outside of Michigan. Penn State was a favorite against Ole Miss, and they lost. We also have Ohio State, a favorite against Missouri. Well, they also lost as well. And then we also have the American Conference. The American Conference I have tied for fifth as well. The American was a solid year for the American Conference. We saw, of course, USF blowing out Syracuse. We also had, UTSA handle business against Marshall. Um, Memphis beating Iowa State, another Power 5 team. It was a solid year overall for the American, and it was one of the better teams in bowl season. But then the Sun Belt happened. And of course, the Sun Belt we had to be pretty up high on. We have them fourth right now with 8 points total. And the Sun Belt got almost every team into a bowl game, all but just a couple. And while they end up finishing below 500, for the most part, there wasn't really too many games where Sun Belt teams were getting blown out of the water. And of course, you have like Georgia State, South Alabama, also, and Texas State too, garnering a ton of points for the Sun Belt as a whole. So that really helps the Sun Belt, and the fact that you had 12 of 14 teams as well. Third, I have the Big 12 with 9 total points in this scenario. Big 12 ended up doing pretty solid in this bowl season as well. Key wins include like Texas Tech beating Cal, Kansas beating UNLV, Oklahoma State beating Texas A&M. Oklahoma State was a very slight favorite. Oklahoma State got it done there. West Virginia win the Duke Mayo's Bowl. What else do we have? Kansas State. Kansas State, we were very high up on all year long. They beat NC State. And of course, you have Texas making it into the college football playoff, which leads to a team that's actually in the national championship game. Washington in that Pac 12 conference. Pac 12 was a conference that is going to be on its final stand, but Pac 12 overall doing very good. 11 total points. Depending on what Washington does, if they can blow out Michigan somehow, they could actually tie or even surpass the SEC this particular bowl season. It is kind of that close. Like the SEC is going to be at number one, but Pac 12, they are right there. Multiple ranked wins. You got Oregon beating Liberty, Washington beating Texas in the college football playoff, Arizona beating Oklahoma, USC pulling an upset off against Louisville. I mean, it was an excellent bowl season for the Pac 12 from that standpoint. It could get even better if Washington can come out and actually win this national championship game against Michigan. It's going to be a tall task to do so. And of course, the SEC, we do have number one for now, but that is subject to change. Multiple rank wins for the SEC as well. Missouri beating Ohio State, Georgia beating Florida State, Ole Miss beating Penn State, LSU beating Wisconsin, Tennessee beating Iowa convincingly, like a drum as well. And even in the losses, the SEC was competitive in all of their games. Auburn's loss, the only exception being Auburn losing to Maryland, but their other losses, Texas A&M, that was a one possession game. Kentucky went right down to the wire with a ranked Clemson squad too. So, and of course, Alabama barely losing to Michigan in the Rose Bowl. That went to overtime as well. So overall, really good year for the SEC. We have them at number one for now. That is, of course, going to be subject for change. And the last thing I wanted to talk about here tonight, the very last thing, we're going to get off the soapbox of the conference championship or conference rankings for the bowl season. Let me know what you think down in the comment section. Again, I had a point system for this. That's how I utilize many of these decisions. But let me know what you guys think about that down in the comment section in terms of how these conferences performed in the bowl season. Let me know what you feel about that and what your honest opinion is on that matter. Last thing that we have for tonight before we're gonna go ahead and sign off. Transfer portal has been heating up. There's no secret that the transfer portal is very popular this time of year. It recently closed, but we had some interesting names hop in the transfer portal, of course, and that even applies for even just within the last week for the last week since the last time that we had an Any Given Saturday podcast. Now, I am recording this as of January the 4th. The reason why I had my AirPods in for the majority of the podcast tonight is I wanted to have a listen in to see if there was any breaking news happening in terms of the transfer portal. Didn't see anything happen, so the AirPods are out and we are locked in. So quite a few names, but there's quite a few that I wanted to bring to your attention that maybe isn't necessarily going to be talked about nearly as much, but wanted to bring their names up because they were either blue chip guys or they were former blue chip guys that are in the transfer portal. And the first guy that I wanted to talk about has been in the transfer portal since December 31st is a edge rusher out of the University of Miami. That is Collins Akupong. I believe that's how you say his name. He was a true freshman at the University of Miami. He was a four-star player coming out of high school. He has since been downgraded to for a three-star player in this transfer portal. And Collins Akupong, he was someone that didn't even see the field. This is not somebody that ended up going ahead and hey, maybe you played in a few games and you just didn't record any stats. No, he did not record any stats at all. He did not see the field at all this year. So for better terms, he was redshirted for his true freshman season. We feel that he's going to transfer away because, let's face it, he wants to get on the field as soon as possible and doesn't necessarily think that's going to happen here at Miami in the near future. So we're looking at possible fits for this guy moving forward. And this guy was a California kid when he first came to the United States, originally was from Ghana. So this is a guy that probably has not been playing football for too terribly long. And if I'm him and I'm trying to get yourself onto a field as soon as possible, and at the same time, maybe trying to get back home, like a little bit closer to his hometown since being in the United States, looking at going over to possibly out in the Mountain West to play your college football. He is a first time transfer. That's not as relevant anymore because of the recent ruling. But I'm looking at possibly going to a place like San Jose State, San Diego State, or Fresno State, like one of those three schools if he wants to see the field sooner. San Jose State, mainly because that's more of an offensive program. They could use a defensive boost. I'm also keeping an eye on teams like UNLV and Nevada, given especially UNLV being with the Sin City in your backyard. They might be able to produce a good amount of NIL money for what a school of Mountain West caliber could reasonably produce, right? So we'll see what Collins Akupong ends up going to. He is not crystal balled anywhere yet as of the recording of this video. If he does get crystal balled at another time, we'll certainly keep an eye out on that. Speaking of UNLV, one of its players in the transfer portal, the redshirt freshman Jaden Maliva, he's a quarterback at UNLV. He played in all of their games this year. Now, he was upgraded. He was a three-star prospect coming out of high school. He picked UNLV over Louisville. And so he played in this redshirt freshman year, played in all of their games, and he put up a bunch of yards, over 3,300 total yards, 20 total touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. So it's good production, but not great production, I would say. I think the reason he's been upgraded as a four-star in the transfer portal is because this is a quarterback that does have starting experience, and he also has an extra 3 years of college eligibility remaining. So, with him already starting, I'm sure he wants to go to a bigger school that also is going to give him a chance to start. And there's a couple of good fits here that I think BYU could be an option, as well as possibly Stanford, depending on what his grades are looking. But if I want to talk about a best fit in the West Coast, I would not be surprised if UCLA makes a run at this kid. You need a quarterback. You have not signed a quarterback in the transfer portal as of yet. You also had Dante Moore leaving for your new conference rival in Oregon. Oregon's coming to the Big Ten as well. I think Maiva, bare minimum, if he can't start at UCLA right away, you can at least mold him into the type of offense that Chip Kelly wants to run. But I think if he wants to start at a power five, or I guess we're moving towards that power four right away, I think UCLA makes a lot of sense here if you're Jaden Maliva. So again, he's also somebody that has not been crystal balled anywhere. He is not committed. So we'll keep an eye out on that. One player that is from the Ohio State, though, that is crystal ball, but not confirmed by any means, is Noah Rogers. He's one of the wide receivers in that talented Ohio State wide receiver room. This is a former four-star prospect, and as a true freshman, while he didn't record any stats, he actually did appear in a couple of games, though. And I don't blame Noah Rogers for wanting to transfer out of Ohio State. You saw the insane amount of talent that is in that room between Julian Fleming, Emmanuel Buka, Michael Harrison Jr. You also have Cornell Tate, a true freshman that is above you in the depth chart. Plus, all of those stud wide receivers that are coming in next year. So Noah Rogers looking around saying, I'm probably not going to play here. So he's crystal balled to NC State, and I think that makes a lot of sense for him. Gives him an opportunity to possibly start at NC State, most likely alongside Kevin Concepcion. Kevin Concepcion, as a true freshman, put up over 1,100 scrimmage yards. So Concepcion would be the wide receiver one, but for Noah Rogers to possibly slide in there at number two, that wouldn't be such a bad idea because there was no other receiver in the NC State receiving room that posted 250 yards or more. So Noah Rogers being the NC State would make a lot of sense. We'll see if there is any other teams that hop into that race, but for now, it looks like Noah Rogers is going to go to NC State at this time. Keeping ourselves down south, though, we have a couple of players from LSU entering the transfer portal just a couple of days ago. One that is more notable to me is Lance Hurd. Lance Hurd was a five-star offensive tackle at LSU. This dude, as a true freshman, by the way, he appeared in all 12 of the games that he played. So I was surprised that he wanted to leave LSU. Louisiana kid, by the way, leaving after just one season when you played all 12 games. It was certainly a little bit of a shock to me personally. He was either a Louisiana kid or a Texas kid. I think he's a Louisiana kid. But I'm looking at Lance Hurd. There isn't a single team in the country that would not mind having more offensive linemen in the war chest, right? But not everyone can get a former five-star offensive tackle. So a couple of schools here would be probably the best fits. I originally had Ole Miss and Texas neck to neck. I was very indecisive of what would be more likely for him to go to, but Ole Miss is losing one of their star running backs in the transfer portal. That was announced earlier today. We'll see how his recruitment and transfer portal goes before we talk about him on a later podcast. So I have Texas having a better advantage because I think Lance Hurd, one, wants to go for more NIL money. I think this has that type of feel because he's already getting playing time at an elite school in LSU. But I think NIL is a little bit of an issue. He's looking for that money. I think Texas would have that advantage, although Ole Miss, while I wasn't as confident as in them as I was just 24 hours ago, I do still like Ole Miss being in this race because Ole Miss is a little bit more cutting edge in terms of how it handles its NIL. So we'll keep an eye on Ole Miss. Other possible good fits would be, like Baylor, Houston, TCU, Texas Tech, like those kinds of schools, and like the new Big 12. But really, this is a two-team race here in all reality. Looking at either Texas or Ole Miss signing off. And then the other guy that's in this transfer portal, Jalen Brown, wide receiver out of LSU. Didn't put up any stats, but he did appear in 3 separate games this year. Um, he's crystal balled to Florida State right now. And if that is the case, if that does hold up, and he does end up going to Florida State, like 247 Sports is saying that he is, he could realistically start there next year, or at least he'd have a realistic opportunity to do so. Because the top 2 lineouts for Florida State, both Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson, both of them are entering this NFL draft. So Florida State's going to have to replace those receivers somehow, whether it's through like high school ranks or through the transfer portal. Jalen Brown could slide in there if he is worth the hype. He did get redshirt this year because he did appear in 4 games or less, so he does have 4 more years of eligibility. Someone that does not have as much eligibility, however, is Tume Adewale. Tume Adewale is a defensive lineman at Michigan State right now. He originally committed to Texas A&M back in 2021. He was at Texas A&M for a couple of years, and then he transfers to Michigan State. And at a Michigan State squad that really was underwhelming this year, they were not in a bowl game for obvious reasons. He appears in just 6 of the 12 games, puts up 9 tackles, couple TFLs, sack, forced fumble. I'm looking at this kid, and there's a reason he's downgraded to 3 stars in the 247 Sports transfer portal. I think it's because I don't think he's going to live up to that 4-star status. And if I'm in Adaway's camp, I'm letting this kid know that maybe Power 5 football is not necessarily right for you. I think you want to go back to the state of Texas, maybe head back into that group of 5, primarily looking at American teams like North Texas. I think North Texas would make a lot of sense, but there's some other schools in there that are kind of close, like Tulsa, Tulane, Louisiana Monroe. They haven't signed a defensive lineman in the transfer portal yet. Even a couple of Conference USA schools like Sam Houston State and UTEP. If you're serious about getting on the field, I think those types of schools would make a lot of sense. He would be a second-time transfer, and if the injunction ultimately fails, regardless of where he goes, he would have to sit out a year. So he was a redshirt sophomore this year, and so if that is the case that would fail, he would have a year, 2 years max of eligibility remaining. However, there is another defensive player in this transfer portal that is going to be extremely impactful, and I think would be a huge add to any defensive backfield in the Southeast. Yam Banks, safety out of South Alabama. He was just a 2-star recruit. Granted, this guy had 1 FBS offer to South Alabama, and that was it. He had a few FCS offers. Alabama State, Central Arkansas, and Jacksonville State back to when they were at that FCS level. But in terms of FBS high-level Division I football, South Alabama was that only offer. So Yam Banks went to South Alabama, and after being redshirted his freshman year, he's been the starter for the Jaguars the last few years. He's got 7 career interceptions. I believe he's an all Sun Belt Conference player, so a very good player in the South Alabama secondary. He's looking for a new home. Possibly has 1, maybe 2 years of eligibility left, tops. That is it. So we're going to make the most out of this opportunity. I expect him to go to a bigger school, possibly a bigger school that hasn't gone to a bowl game. I'm really looking at Florida. In this particular case, Florida could use some dudes. And Zam Banks, man, he is a dude. And Billy Napier could use a guy like that in his defensive backfield that knows how to play winning football But don't be surprised if Mississippi State is also in this race as well. Mississippi State does have a brand new head coach. Their head coach is from the Sun Belt as well, coached against this kid. So he probably knows a thing or two about how good Yam Banks is in person. So Mississippi State is a school to keep an eye on. I think Florida would be the favorite, but there's a few other schools I think would certainly be interested. Georgia, Alabama, Auburn, Florida State, and Georgia Tech. Like, there's going to be quite a few schools in the Southeast that would love this kid. But regardless of what happens, Florida does get at least one key pickup in the transfer portal. Grayson Howard, the linebacker out of South Carolina. He's a former four-star. Getting somebody from a fellow conference opponent, that's always a cool thing to see. So he's committed to Florida, and I think he's enrolled there as well. Rounding out your transfer portal updates, the last one that I have on the peripherals right now is Seth McLaughlin. He's an interior offensive lineman at Alabama, playing at center for Alabama. And if the last time you've probably seen this guy play, he messed up a couple of snaps. Didn't cost him the game, but it certainly didn't help. But aside from snapping the football, this is actually a very good offensive lineman. This is a guy that appeared in 25 games at the University of Alabama. And listen, if you can start at Alabama, that's a big deal. Alabama's been a very good program for a very long time. So there's going to be some suitors here for Seth McLaughlin even within this conference, if he wants to pursue an opportunity to possibly compete for a national championship while also getting playing time at the same juncture, which again, I think get a playing time at a lot of different places. I think Georgia is one. I think Georgia would love to have him to snag somebody out of Alabama. I think that would be the best fit for him if he wants to compete for a national championship. I think Georgia would be in a better position than Alabama, in my opinion, going into next year moving forward. But of course, there's a bunch of other schools that would want him too. South Carolina, Tennessee, Florida, Auburn, even going outside of the SEC. You want to go to the ACC, or at least what's still left of it, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Wake Forest, Duke, and Clemson. So Seth McClellan, a person I am looking after, and I would be gladly to give you guys some updates on what's happening there. But guys, that is my transfer portal roundup. There's a lot happening in this transfer portal right now. I'm sure that will continue as we hear more about guys wanting to pursue opportunities outside of their current institution. But we're going to go ahead and wrap things up here. I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast here tonight. Next time out, we'll talk about that. We'll recap that national championship game and possibly do some more transfer portal stuff. I'll also be open if you guys had some questions that you wanted me to answer. If you had a question for me, let me know down in the comment section. I'd be glad to include that in a future podcast. Seems like a great time to just have a mailbag and hear from you, the viewer. And it could even be, like constructive feedback as well. As we are closing in on our first college football season with this podcast. And it's been fun to do, even though we may not be the biggest channel on earth. It's something I've been really enjoying. And I always enjoy the opportunity to try to get better, but I don't know what my blind spots are all the time. So if you have constructive feedback for me, I truly appreciate that in a kind way, of course. And then also, yeah, if you have any questions, you want me to give an opinion on something college football related, yeah, let me know down in the comment section. I would love to answer that. I think I'd love to have a mailbag in the next podcast if that's something that you guys would want. So I'm going to sign off for tonight. I want to go spend some time with the wife, as well as my other four-legged friends here in the house. Hope you enjoyed this show tonight. If you have, make sure to go ahead and smack that like button, because that does let me know that, one, you enjoy this content. I truly appreciate that if you do, and it helps me out with that YouTube algorithm as well. If you're brand new to the channel, you have a real opportunity to be that A1 since day one as well. So if you want to be an A1 since day one, all you got to do is hit that subscribe button at the bottom right-hand corner. Would be really cool to see. So that being said, I am your host, Jake. I am going to sign off for tonight, and I hope you guys are all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.